The first time she tried to stand up in front of me, her legs trembled so hard I thought she would fall, and when she looked straight into my eyes and quietly said, "You don't have to stay if it's pity," my chest tightened with a fear I couldn't name. I didn't even fully understand how I'd ended up there yet. I just knew something about this moment was going to change me. Before we go any further, if you enjoy stories that remind you how deeply human kindness can run, take a second to subscribe to True Kindness Tales. These stories come from the heart, and if this one touches you, I'd love to hear your thoughts or experiences in the comments as we go along. I was 29, living in a quiet suburban town in Ohio, working a steady but unremarkable job in IT support. My life was simple, almost painfully predictable. Wake up early, grab coffee from the same drive-thru, sit in a cubicle answering tickets, come home to a small apartment that felt more like a storage unit for a single man's routines than a home. After a messy breakup the year before, I'd promised myself I wouldn't rush into anything serious again. Dating apps were supposed to be harmless. A way to talk, maybe laugh, maybe distract myself from the quiet. That's how I met her. Her profile was warm and funny, full of small observations about life, dogs she'd met at the park, and her love for old black and white movies. Her photos were mostly close-ups of her face, bright eyes, a crooked smile, hair pulled back casually. Nothing about her profile screamed tragedy or struggle. If anything, she seemed grounded and thoughtful, the kind of person who noticed things other people walked past. We talked for weeks before meeting. Late-night conversations that drifted from childhood memories to fears about the future. She listened in a way that made me feel seen, and she remembered small details, like how I hated raisins or how my dad used to fix old radios in the garage. When she suggested we finally meet, she proposed a small cafe near her place. She said it was quiet, easy to talk in. When I arrived, I saw her sitting by the window. She smiled when she saw me, but there was a brief hesitation as she stood up. That was the first moment I realized something was different. She used the table to steady herself, her movements careful, deliberate. She apologized immediately, brushing it off with a light joke about being clumsy. I didn't press. We sat, ordered coffee, and talked like we'd known each other for years. It wasn't until halfway through the date that she explained. She told me she'd been in a car accident 3 years earlier. A drunk driver ran a red light. She survived, but her spinal cord was damaged. One side of her body never fully recovered. She could walk short distances with effort, but most days, she relied on a wheelchair or a brace. She said it calmly, without drama, like someone explaining the weather. I nodded, told her I was glad she was still here, and meant it. What I didn't say was how betrayed I felt afterward. Not by her condition, but by the way I'd found out. It felt like a trick, even though I knew that wasn't fair. On the drive home, my thoughts were a mess. I wondered if she'd hidden it on purpose. I wondered if I was strong enough to be involved with someone who carried that much pain. I even wondered what my friends would say. Those thoughts made me feel ashamed, but they were there, loud and persistent. I didn't text her the next day. Or the day after that. On the third day, she messaged me first. She said she hoped I was okay and that she understood if I didn't want to continue. She said she'd learned not to take silence personally, but she wanted to be honest. That honesty stung. I replied, awkwardly at first, saying I'd been busy. It was a lie. We ended up meeting again a week later, this time for a walk in a small park near her apartment. That's when the cracks in my assumptions started to show. People waved at her as we passed. An older woman stopped to chat, a teenager jogged by and high-fived her. She knew everyone's name. She laughed easily, even when her leg dragged slightly on the path. When she grew tired, we sat on a bench, and she talked about how she'd had to relearn patience. How progress came in inches, not leaps. How some days felt like victories and others felt like starting over. Still, doubt lingered. I caught myself doing things out of obligation instead of desire. Holding doors, slowing my pace, offering help before she asked. One evening, while we were watching a movie at her place, she turned to me suddenly and asked if I was staying because I wanted to or because I felt bad. I tried to dodge the question, but she didn't let me. She told me she'd been pitted before, and it hurt worse than being alone. She said those exact words, quietly but firmly. You don't have to stay if it's pity. That moment haunted me. I went home and sat in the dark, replaying everything. I realized how little I'd actually listened to her fears, how focused I'd been on my own discomfort. The truth was uncomfortable. I hadn't been tricked into dating her. I'd been tricked into confronting parts of myself I didn't like. My impatience. My fear of inconvenience. My shallow idea of what a relationship should look like. The turning point came a few weeks later when she had a physical therapy setback. She called me, embarrassed, asking if I could drive her to the hospital because she was in too much pain to manage on her own. I went without hesitation, surprising even myself. I sat in the waiting room for hours, watching families pass through, hearing monitors beep behind closed doors. When she finally came out, exhausted and frustrated, she apologized again. I told her she didn't need to. And for the first time, I meant it completely. After that, something shifted. I stopped keeping mental score of what I was giving. We cooked together, slowly. We learned how to laugh when things went wrong. When strangers stared, she squeezed my hand, and instead of feeling awkward, I felt protective in a quiet, steady way. She taught me how to see the world from a seated height, how different the sidewalks looked, how kindness could be as small as eye contact or as big as redesigning a life. One night, months into our relationship, we attended a small gathering at her friend's house. Someone asked me, casually, how hard it must be to date someone like her. I felt a flash of anger I didn't expect. I realized how wrong that question was. Hard wasn't the word. Honest was. Raw was. Real was. I answered politely, but later, on the drive home, she thanked me for how I'd handled it. I told her the truth. That being with her had made me braver in ways I never anticipated. That's when we had the conversation that brought us back to that first moment. She reminded me of the day she'd tried to stand and asked me not to stay out of pity. She said she needed to know, even now. I told her that if I'd stayed out of pity, I would have left long ago. I stayed because she challenged me, grounded me, and showed me a kind of strength I'd never learned growing up. She cried softly, not from sadness, but from relief. Years later, when I look back, I don't think about the accident or the wheelchair first. I think about the way she notices people. The way she celebrates tiny victories. The way she taught me that kindness isn't about sacrifice, but about presence. About choosing to see someone fully, without filters or fear. What began with confusion and discomfort turned into the most honest connection of my life. It taught me that kindness isn't always grand gestures. Sometimes it's staying long enough to unlearn your assumptions. Sometimes it's listening when someone tells you the truth about themselves and believing them. If this story leaves you with anything, let it be this. The people who change us most often don't arrive in the packages we expect. They arrive with challenges that invite us to grow. And when we meet that invitation with compassion instead of fear, we don't just help someone else. We become kinder versions of ourselves. If you've ever experienced a moment where kindness reshaped your life, I'd love for you to share it in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.